Turn them away, they are not our friends." The order came down the harbor wall in a voice that did not expect to be questioned, and I heard it the way you hear a wave you have not yet seen, the sound first, the weight after. I was 4 paces to Havard Wren's right, both of us at the rail above the King's Quay, the storm coming in off the dark water like a thing with a grudge, and the man who had spoken stood between us with his collar turned up against the rain, and his hand pointing out past the breakwater at a light that should not have been there. I want to set this down plainly, the way it happened, because in the years since I have heard it told 3 or 4 different ways, and none of them got the heart of it right. They make Wren into a man who shouted. He never shouted. They make the official into a villain twirling a mustache. He was worse than that, and simpler. He was a frightened man with authority, which is the most dangerous animal that walks. And they leave out the part that matters most, which is that one guard standing on a wall in a storm did not save anyone by himself. He only refused to be the reason no one else could. My name is Corwin Bly. I have stood the harbor watch of the House of Marin for 9 years, on the great curved wall they call the Sea Stair, where the King's Quay runs out into the deep water of Sablemouth, and the lighthouse at the head of the mole throws its long arm across the swells. We are the King's Guard here, the same red wool and the same tall black bearskins they wear at the landward gates, only ours are gone gray-green at the shoulders from salt, and we carry the same rifles, and we keep the same stillness. People who come down from the capital are always surprised that the ceremonial guard stands a sea post at all. They think we are statues for the gates. They do not think about what a gate on the water is for. That night the gate on the water had a ship trying to come through it, and a man from the ministry trying to shut it. His name was Deputy Warden Sale Othick, and he had come down 3 days before with a leather case and a clerk and a letter of authority, on account of the trade dispute. I will not pretend I understood all of it, the dispute, and I will not pretend it mattered once the weather turned. The short of it was this: the realm of Vor, across the strait, had spent a year squeezing our shipping with fees and seizures and harbor closures of their own, and our ministry had answered in kind, and there was bad blood salted into every cargo manifest that crossed the water between us. Vor ships were not welcome in Sablemouth. There was a notice nailed to the customs board that said so. They were rivals. In the colder corners of the ministry, I think, they were nearly called enemies. And now, at the worst hour of the worst storm of the autumn, a Vor ship was burning a signal off our breakwater and dying. You could see it the moment the lightning lit the water. A merchantman, heavy in the bow, her foremast gone and trailing in the sea alongside her like a broken wing. Her people working the pumps you could not see but could somehow feel. The whole vessel down by the head and swinging side on to the swell, which is the way a ship dies. She was throwing up flares, the red ones, the ones that mean what they have always meant on every sea in the world, and between the flares, she had a lamp at her rail blinking the old code, the one every man who has ever stood a sea watch knows in his sleep, dot and dash, spelling the only word that has ever truly outranked a flag. Distress. Turn them away, Deputy Warden Othick said again, louder, because Wren had not moved and had not answered. Signal the lighthouse to darken the channel lamps. Close the boom. They are a Vor hull. I can read the cut of her from here. They have no leave to enter Sablemouth, and they will not get it tonight. Do you understand me, guardsmen? Wren understood him. I watched Wren understand him. I had stood beside Havard Wren for 6 years, and I knew the look on the side of his face that the official could not see, not anger, nothing so warm as anger. A kind of settling. The look of a man who has just been told the one thing he will not do, and has finished being unsure about anything at all. That ship is in distress, sir, Wren said. His voice was low and even, and it carried under the wind the way a true thing carries. She has the right of every distressed vessel on the water. We render aid. She is an enemy hull. She is a ship full of men who will be in the sea within the hour, Wren said. Who she is comes after that. It comes a long way after that. I have turned that sentence over many times since. Who she is comes after that. There was no heat in it. He might have been telling the man the tide tables. But Othick flinched as though he'd been struck, because some men can feel the floor of an argument drop out from under them even when the voice that does it never rises. "You will do as you are instructed," Othick said. "I carry the authority of the ministry. This is a matter of state. You are a guard on a wall. You will signal the lighthouse to go dark, and you will close the boom, and you will let the strait take care of a problem that is not ours to solve. Those are your orders." The rain came sideways then, a long cold lash of it, and out past the mole the dying ship rolled and showed us her wet deck for half a heartbeat in the lightning, men small as nails clinging to her rail, and went dark again. Wren did not look away from the official. He had not looked at the ship since the order came. He did not need to. He had read her in the first 10 seconds and he had made up his mind in the next 10, and everything after that was only this man, and the wall, and the law. "No, sir," Wren said. "I will not. I have thought a great deal about why the order to refuse a drowning man comes so easily to a certain kind of mouth, and I have decided it is because that mouth has never once stood where the water actually is." Othick was not a cruel man. He was a careful man, a frightened man, handed a feud he did not start and told to win it, and somewhere in the leather case under his arm there was no doubt a paragraph about reciprocity, and another about how the realm of Vor had closed its own harbor to our ships in a gale not 2 months past. All of that was probably true. None of it weighed an ounce against the lamp blinking distress off the breakwater, but he could not feel that, because he had spent his whole life a long way from the rail. "You are refusing a lawful order," Othick said, and his voice climbed now thin at the top. "I will have you off this wall. I will have your name and your number, and I will have you broken for this. Do you hear me? You are one man." "I am one man, sir," Wren agreed. "But I am the man you have to get past to darken that lighthouse, and you cannot get past me." It was true in the most literal way. The signal to the lighthouse went out from a brass key in a housing bolted to the wall not 3 feet behind Wren's heel, and the lever that dropped the harbor boom, the great chain and timber barrier that could close the channel mouth against a hostile hull, that was bolted beside it. And Havard Wren was standing his post directly between Deputy Warden Othick and both of them, the way he had stood his post every night for 6 years, and the official could no more move him than he could move the mole. "Bligh," Wren said, not turning his head, "send the word." That was to me. I want to be honest about myself in this. There was half a second where I did not move, where the whole weight of the ministry and the leather case and the broken career hung in front of me like a wave about to fall. I was 9 years on the wall, and I had a wife in the lower town and 2 boys, and the man telling me to do nothing had the authority of the state behind him, and the man telling me to act had only the law of the sea and the look on the side of his face. It was not a hard choice. I only want to tell you it was a choice, because Wren made it look like there was nothing to choose, and that was a kind of gift he gave me. He made the right thing look obvious when it was only right. "Send what word?" Othick snapped. "There is no word to send. The matter is closed." I sent the word. There is a guard line that runs the length of the sea stair and up the mole to the lighthouse and back along the inner quays to the watch house and the slip where the harbor master keeps his boats. It is not wire. It is men and lamps and a few old voice pipes and the oldest signaling code in the service, and it is the most reliable thing I have ever trusted my life to. I went to the rail housing and I took up the small bullseye lamp on its bracket, and I shuttered it 3 times long and 2 short toward the watch house, which is the call that means stand to, all hands, and then I sent down the line in plain dots and dashes the only thing that mattered. Vessel in distress off the breakwater, foremast gone down by the head, foundering. The deputy warden orders her refused. The guard on the sea stair does not. I sent the last part because Wren told me to after, when I asked him whether I should soften it. "No," he said. "Send it straight. Let every man on the line know exactly what he is choosing when he answers. That is the whole of Havard Wren in one sentence if you want it. He would not let a single man on that wall be tricked into doing right. He made them all choose it with their eyes open, the way he had. The watch house answered in 9 seconds. I counted, stood to, coming. And then, because the storm does not wait for ministries, everything happened at once. The dying ship fired another flare, lower this time, and in its red glare I saw she had swung fully broadside and the next big sea would roll her. And out at the head of the mole the lighthouse blinked a query down the line. What are your orders for the channel? Because the lighthouse keeper, old Master Pellin, had seen the same flare, and was reaching for the same lamp the official wanted darkened, and he wanted to know whether to light the channel run or go dark. Darken it, Othick said over my shoulder, fast, seizing on it. Guardsmen, signal the keeper to go dark. That is a direct order, and it is the last time I will give it kindly. I looked at Wren. Wren looked at the lighthouse. Bligh, he said, tell Master Pellin to light the channel full run, every lamp he has. Tell him the sea stair guard takes the responsibility, by name, Havard Wren, and to put it in his log against me if he wants it on someone. I sent it. Out at the head of the mole, after a pause that lasted about 1,000 years, the great lamp of the Sablemouth light swung its beam down off the open sea and laid it along the channel run like a road of fire on the black water. And one after another the smaller channel lamps came up the line of the breakwater, gold and steady against the storm, every one of them lit, the whole harbor mouth suddenly speaking the same word the dying ship had been begging into the dark for an hour: come in. This way. We see you, come in. I heard, very faint under the wind, a sound from the broken ship. I have never been sure if I truly heard it or if I have given it to the memory since, because the memory wanted it there. But I think I heard them cheer. A thin, ragged sound off the water, men who had been signaling into a darkness that would not answer, watching the darkness become a lit road home. Deputy Warden Othick made a noise I will not try to spell, and I felt him move behind me, lunging for the brass key himself, to darken the light with his own hand if the guard would not. And that is the only time in the whole night that Havard Wren moved quickly. He did not strike the man. He simply turned, and he was suddenly between Othick and the key, and he put one white-gloved hand flat against the housing, not on the man, on the brass, and he stood there, immovable as the wall he was part of, and he said, very quietly, Sir, you will not touch the king's signal. I have refused your order, and I have given my reasons, and you may break me for it tomorrow with my whole heart's consent. But you will not put out the light on a foundering ship while I am alive on this wall, and there is no paper in your case that lets you, and you know it. And Othick stopped. I think he stopped because of the last 6 words. You know it. Because under the feud and the leather case and the authority, the man did know it. Every man who has ever stood near the water knows it. The law of the sea is older than any realm's quarrel, and it is written in a place deeper than ministries reach, and what it says has never changed. When a vessel is in distress, you render aid. You do not ask who she is. You do not ask what she did to you last month off your own breakwater in your own gale. You go. The right of the distressed outranks the order of the state, because the state is a thing men made, and the sea is a thing they did not. And the first law of men who go to sea is that the water does not care whose ship she takes, so the men must, all of them, every flag or none. Othick knew it. He had simply hoped a guard on a wall would not make him face it. Stand to, came the shout from the inner quay, and the night filled with the sound of boots. They came up the sea stair in a body, the way the watch is meant to come, and almost never has to. Sergeant Doran Hask at the head of them, a square, hard man 20 years on the wall, with 6 guardsmen behind him buttoning their tunics against the rain as they ran. And behind the guardsmen, the harbor wardens with their long boat hooks and their oilskins. And behind the wardens already, because the word had run faster than men can, the first of the boat crews from the slip with the harbor master himself among them, bareheaded in the storm. An old sea captain named Iram Vane, who had run the King's Harbor for 30 years, and had pulled more men living and dead out of Sablemouth water than anyone alive. Sergeant Hask came up the stair and took it in with one sweep of his eyes, the broken ship in the lit channel, the lighthouse blazing, the deputy warden white-faced with his hand half raised toward the signal housing, and Havard Wren standing his post in front of it with one glove flat on the brass. "Report," Hask said. "Vessel foundering off the breakwater, Sergeant," Wren said, easy as the tide. "Vor merchantman foremast carried away down by the head, men still aboard. I have refused the deputy warden's order to refuse her the harbor and to darken the light. I have lit the channel on my own authority and entered it against my own name. The light stays up. The boom stays open. Those are my decisions, and I will answer for every one of them." "Will you?" Hask said. It was not a question. He turned his head and looked at the deputy warden the way a man looks at something the storm has washed up. "Deputy warden, you ordered a KingsGuard to put out the light on a sinking ship." "It is a Vor hull," Othick said. The thinness was back at the top of his voice. "I carry the authority of the—" "I heard you the first time," Hask said. "I'm asking the harbor master, not you. Master Vane, there's a ship in distress in your channel. Whose harbor is this?" Iram Vane had not stopped moving the whole while. He was already at the rail with a glass to his eye, reading the broken ship the way the rest of us read print, and he answered without lowering it. "The harbor is the King's," he said, "and the King's harbor renders aid to any vessel in distress in any weather flying any flag, and it has done so for 240 years, and the day it stops is the day I hand back the keys." He lowered the glass. His old face was wet and perfectly calm. "She's got maybe 20 minutes before that next big set rolls her, and there are men on her afterdeck I can count by the lightning, so I'd be obliged if the politics could wait in the watch house where it's dry. Sergeant, I'll need your wall lit and your boom held open, and your guns of the mole ready to put a line across if my boats can't close her in this sea. Guardsmen," and here he turned to Wren, and something passed over the old captain's face, "you lit my channel. I'd have lit it myself in another minute, but you got there first against an order, and I'll not forget which way you jumped. Now, are you with my boats or holding this wall?" "I hold the wall, Master Vane," Wren said. "It's my post, but the wall is yours tonight and every man on it." "Good lad," said Iram Vane, and was gone down the stair toward the slip with his crews behind him. And that was the moment, if you want to know it, when the thing stopped being one guard refusing an order and became a whole harbor doing its oldest work. Deputy Warden Othick tried once more. I will give him that. He was not a coward in the ordinary way. He stepped into the middle of the stair, into the running men, and he held up his leather case as though it were a writ that could stop the tide. "Stop," he said. "All of you, stop. I am ordering this rescue stood down. The realm of Vor left one of our ships in the weather not 2 months ago. They closed their own harbor to us in a gale and let our people stand off all night, and now you would risk the King's boats and the King's men for theirs. Where is the sense in it? Where is the justice? Stand down. Let the straight answer them the way they answered us." And the running men stopped. Not because they agreed. They stopped the way you stop when an authority you have been raised to obey plants itself in front of you, the old reflex, and for a moment the whole rescue hung on the edge of the wall, and I felt the storm pulling at it. It was Wren who answered, and he answered without moving from his post, and he answered the only way that could have held them. "If they did that, sir," he said, "then they broke the law of the sea, and men of theirs may have died of it, and that is on their souls and their ministry and not on ours. We do not become right by waiting for them to be wrong twice. The law of the sea does not say render aid to those who would render it to you. It says render aid. There is no second half. The whole of its power is that there is no second half." He paused, and the rain ran off the peak of his bearskin, and he said the thing I have carried with me from that night to this: "We answer for what we are, not for what they are." Let go that case, sir, and stand aside or stand and watch, but the men are going." And the men went. I do not think Othic had ever in his life heard a sentence he could not get around. He stood with his case held up in the rain, and the guardsmen and the wardens and the boat crews flowed past him on both sides like water round a piling. And his authority, which had been the largest thing on the wall 10 minutes before, became the smallest, because it turned out to be the one thing on the wall that night that was not for use. Everything else, the lamps, the boats, the boom, the guns of the mole, the backs and the nerve of 100 men, all of it was straining to be used. Only the deputy warden's authority had nothing to do, because the only thing it had come down to the harbor to do was stop a rescue, and a rescue is the one thing a harbor will not be stopped from. I went where Wren sent me, up and down the wall, carrying his word and Hasks and the harbor masters, and so I had the whole shape of it, and I will give it to you the way it unfolded, because the rescue itself was a thing worth seeing, and because every part of it was the same refusal Wren had made again by other men down the line. At the head of the mole, Master Pellin, the keeper, held the great light steady on the channel and trimmed every lamp he had, and never once thought of the deputy warden's order to go dark, because the order had not reached him as an order. It had reached him as Wren's word. The guard takes the responsibility. Light the channel. And an old lighthouse keeper asked to choose between a frightened man's paper and a guard putting his own name on the line for a sinking ship does not have to think very long. Pellin lit a lamp that night that is not in any manual, a small bright one he set on the very seaward end of the mole, and tended with his own hands, low down where a foundering ship's helmsman could lay it under his bow as a mark to steer the channel by, and 3 men of that crew are alive because of it. At the slip, Iram Vane put 2 boats in the water that no sane man puts in that sea, the long pulling lifeboat and the steam launch, and went out himself in the lifeboat at the steering oar, 30 years in all, because he said a young coxswain could pull as hard as him, but could not read Sablemouth water in a southwesterly the way he could after 30 winters of it. And he was right. And he laid that boat alongside the broken ship's lee in the trough of the sea, with a judgment of the swell that I will not see bettered if I stand the wall another 40 years. But 2 boats were not enough, and everyone on the wall knew it within the first crossing. The lifeboat came back with 11 half-drowned men in her and a vorship's officer who would not get out until he was told there was more help coming for the one still aboard, and the launch came back with 8 and a broken oar and a stoker scalded at the boiler. And out in the lit channel the broken ship had stopped firing flares, which is a worse sign than firing them, and the next big set of seas was coming up out of the dark, and there were still, Vane's count, called up the line. Better than 30 souls clinging to her afterdeck, with the water at their knees. 2 boats could not bring off 30 men before the sea rolled her. We did not have the boats. The King's Harbor of Sablemouth that night did not have the boats to do its oldest work. And that is when the harbor put to sea. I do not know who started it. Wren always said it was the lower town, and the lower town always said it was the guard, and the harbor master said it was the law of the sea, which has no need of a man to start it because it starts itself in the chest of anyone who has ever stood on a quay and watched a light go out on the water. What I know is what I saw from the wall. Along the inner harbor, where the Sablemouth fishing fleet lay rafted 3 and 4 deep against the storm, lamps began to come up. 1, then a dozen, then the whole basin of them, gold in the rain. And then they began to move. They came out into the channel in a line, the boats of the fleet, the deep-water smacks and the herring luggers and the old broad-beamed trawlers with their nets still aboard, every one of them crewed by men who had been asleep an hour before, and were now pulling for the harbor mouth in a southwesterly gale that no fisherman in his right mind would have crossed his own threshold to face. Because the word had run up every lane in the lower town, the same word Wren made me send straight. A ship is dying off the breakwater and the guard has lit the channel against an order, and the harbor master has put his boats in the water and there are men in the sea. That was all it took. That was the whole muster order. There is a kind of summons that needs no seal, and the law of the sea is the oldest of them, and it had gone out across Sablemouth that night like the tide turning, and the fleet answered it the way the watch-house had answered me, not because anyone made them, but because not one of them could have lived in that town another day having stayed in his bed. I counted 19 boats of the fleet in the channel before I stopped counting. Hiram Vane took the steering oar of his lifeboat and became the master of a fleet he had not commanded an hour before, calling the boats by name across the water in his great carrying voice, sending the steadiest skippers to the broken ship's lee, and the rest to spread along the channel to pick up any man the sea took, so that the strait between the foundering ship and the harbor mouth became a road of lit boats, gunwale to gunwale almost, a chain of hands laid across the black water. And they began to bring the men off the broken ship 2 and 3 to a boat, and pass them down the chain toward the quay, where the wardens and the guardsmen waited to haul them up out of the boats, and onto the dry stone of the King's Harbor. The guns of the mole put a line across. In the end, old Master Gunner Brevin, who had not fired the line-throwing gun in earnest in 11 years, laid it across the broken ship's afterdeck on the second try in that wind, which was a thing close to a miracle, and the Vor crew made it fast and rigged a traveler, and the last dozen men came off her along that line hand over hand above the breaking sea. The very last of them, a gray-bearded man I took at first for the captain and learned later was the ship's old cook, who would not go until every other soul was off, and who came across the line so slow, and so spent that 2 of our guardsmen went down the mole steps into the wash to their waists and took him off it by the arms. And when the broken ship finally rolled and went down, she went bow first, quietly, almost gently, the way a tired thing lies down. There was no one aboard her to drown. Not one. 38 souls had been on that hull when the lightning first showed her to us, and the harbor of Sablemouth brought 38 souls onto its stones, cold and sick and shaking and alive, every one, in the worst storm of the autumn, in defiance of an order from the ministry of the realm, because one guard on a wall would not be the reason it could not be done. I came down off the wall near the end, when Wren finally sent me, and helped haul the boat's painters and pull men up onto the stone, and I will tell you I have never had hands take mine the way those did. The Vor seamen, men of a realm we had a notice nailed to the customs board about, gripping the hands of guardsmen and fishermen and wardens with a strength that came up out of somewhere past words, in a language most of them did not share with us, saying the one thing that needs no shared language, which is thank you, which is I was going to die and you came. It was nearly dawn before the last boat was in, and the count was done twice and held. The storm was blowing itself out, gray light coming up dirty over the strait, and the quay was a chaos of blankets and lamplight and steaming tea kettles brought down from every house in the lower town, and somewhere in the middle of it Deputy Warden Sale Othick was still standing, his leather case under his arm, watching 38 men he had ordered left to the sea being wrapped in dry wool by the people of the King's Harbor. I do not know what was in his face. I did not look long. But I know what was in Havard Wren's, because Wren came down off the wall at the relief. At the proper hour, not a minute early, his post stood to the last as if nothing at all had happened on it, and he walked the length of the quay through all of it without a word, and the men he passed went quiet as he came and stood a little straighter, fishermen and wardens and Vor seamen alike, the way men go quiet and straight for a thing they have just seen and do not quite have the words for. And Wren took no notice of any of it. He stopped once at the slip, where old Hiram Vane sat on a bollard with a blanket round his shoulders and a tin cup shaking in his 30 years' hands, finally spent now that it was done. The 2 of them looked at each other for a moment. 38, Vane said. 38, Wren said. That was the whole of their conversation. Then Wren put his gloved hand on the old captain's shoulder for the space of one breath, which from Havard Wren was the same as another man falling on his neck and weeping, and he walked on, off the quay and up toward the watch-house to make his report, and to wait, with perfect calm, to be broken for what he had done. He very nearly was. I will not pretend the wall closed over the night and forgot it. Deputy Warden Othick was a careful man, and a frightened one, and frightened men with leather cases write letters. By noon he had written his, and it went up the coast road under seal, and it said what such letters say, that a king's guard named Havard Wren had refused a lawful order of the ministry in a matter of state, had defied the deputy warden's authority before the whole harbor, had committed the king's harbor, and the king's men to the rescue of an enemy hull against express instruction, and had so undermined the realm standing in its dispute with Vor that the matter must be answered at the highest level. He asked for Wren's dismissal, and for worse. He framed it as the discipline of the service itself being at stake, for if one guard could refuse the ministry on a wall, what was an order worth anywhere? It was, I have to admit, not a stupid argument. It was the strongest one against Wren that could be made, by a man who genuinely believed it, and for about a week it looked as though it might carry. The order came down that Wren was relieved of his post pending inquiry, and he handed over his rifle and stood down off the sea stair for the first time in 6 years, and he did it without a word of complaint, because a man who has said he will answer for every decision does not flinch when the answering comes. But here is the thing about an order to deny a drowning man, and the thing the deputy warden, careful as he was, had not weighed. You cannot give such an order quietly. It does not stay on a wall. By the time Wren's letter of relief came down from the capital, the night had already gone up the coast road ahead of it, carried by 38 Vor seamen who had been put aboard a relief ship and sent home to a realm we were supposedly at odds with, every one of them telling the same story in his own tongue at his own table. That Sablemouth harbor had lit its channel and put its whole fleet to sea in a killing gale to save them, against the order of its own ministry. Because of one guard on a wall and an old law neither realm had ever stopped believing in. It was carried by the fishermen of the lower town, who told it in every tavern from Sablemouth to the capital, and did not soften the part about the deputy warden. It was carried by Iram Vane, the king's harbor master of 30 years, who wrote his own letter to the capital, and the harbor master's letter did not ask for anything. It simply stated, in the plain hand of a man who had pulled the dead out of that water his whole life, exactly what had happened, beginning with the words, "On the night in question a vessel was in distress in the King's Channel, and the law of the sea, which is older than this ministry and will outlast it, required that we render aid." And it was carried. This is the part the deputy warden had not imagined in his worst hour across the strait, to the realm of Vor itself. A realm whose seamen have just been hauled living out of a foreign gale by men under orders to let them drown, does not stay an enemy quite so easily afterward. The dispute did not vanish. Disputes do not. But it is a hard thing to keep a feud hot when the other realm's harbor has just spent a night proving, at the risk of its own boats and one guard's whole career, that whatever the ministry said, the people who go to the water would not let your people die. The thing the order was meant to defend, the realm standing, its hard line in the quarrel, was not damaged by the rescue. It was the rescue that mended it. Within the season, there were Vor envoys at the capital who would not otherwise have come. So when the matter reached the highest level, and it did reach it, exactly as the deputy warden demanded, it did not find what he had hoped to lay before it. It found a harbor master's plain letter and a town's whole testimony and 38 living men and a realm's quarrel half cooled. And it found, set against all of that, one official's letter asking that the guard who had done it be broken. The household of the House of Marin answered, and it answered the way the harbor had answered the storm, as one thing at scale, all at once. The inquiry was held in the long room of the watch house, with the straight gray in the windows, and it lasted less than a morning. The master of the household came down from the capital himself to sit it, an old lord with a face like the cliffs, and he heard the deputy warden's case in full and in silence, every paragraph of it, the lawful order and the matter of state and the undermined authority. And when Othick had finished, the old lord was quiet for a moment, and then he asked one question. The only question, I think, that the whole night ever came down to. Deputy Warden, he said, had the guard obeyed you, had the light gone dark and the boom gone down and the ship been refused, how many of those 38 men would be alive this morning? And Othick, to his credit, did not lie. He was a careful man. He had read the harbor master's letter too. None, my lord, he said. The ship rolled and sank. None of them would have lived. None of them would have lived, the old lord repeated, as if setting it on a scale. And the order you gave, and that this guard refused, it would have killed 38 men to make a point to the realm of Vor about harbor fees. Have I understood the matter of state correctly? The long room was very quiet. My lord, Othick said, the order was lawful. It may well have been lawful, the old lord said. I do not doubt you had a paper for it. The trouble with your case, Deputy Warden, is not that the guard broke a lawful order. The trouble with your case is that you have come before the household of the king to ask us to break a man for keeping the oldest law there is, and you have done it in a room full of windows that look out on the very water where he kept it. He let that sit. Then, there is an order and there is an oath. When they part company, a guard of this house obeys the oath. That is not insubordination. That is the entire reason we keep guards and not merely clerks. A clerk obeys the last paper that crossed his desk. A guard obeys the thing the papers are for. Guardsman Wren obeyed the thing the papers are for. He is restored to his post this hour, with the thanks of the house entered against his name, and the entry will say why. He turned to Wren then. Wren had stood the whole inquiry at attention against the wall, eyes front, as still in the long room as he had been in the storm, and he said, Guardsmen, you committed the king's harbor to a course that risked the king's boats and the king's men and your own neck, on your own authority, against the ministry in the dark, with no time to ask leave. Tell me why I should want a guard who will do that. My lord, Wren said, you would not want a guard who would not. And the old lord almost smiled and did not, because he was that kind of man, and said only, no, I would not. And it was done. The deputy warden was not broken in his turn. The house was not in the business of breaking men, even careful frightened ones, and the old lord said as much. Othick was moved to an inland post far from any water, the way men are moved who cannot be trusted near the place their mistake was made, and I am told he did the inland work well and never came down to a harbor again. He was not a cruel man. He had only never stood where the water is. As for the law of the sea, it was not changed by any of this, because it cannot be changed. That is the whole of its strength. But it was written down fresh in the standing orders of the Sablemouth Watch after that autumn, in a clause that every guard who has stood the sea stair since has learned by heart, and it says, in the plain words the old harbor master gave it, no order of any office of this realm shall require the guard of this harbor to refuse aid to a vessel in distress, or to darken the light, or to close the channel against a foundering ship, whatever flag she flies. The guard who renders aid against such an order renders it rightly. The law of the sea outranks the order. They cut it into a brass plate, and they bolted the plate to the wall of the sea stair beside the signal housing, low down, where a man standing his post can put his hand on it in the dark, and on bad nights I have seen more than one young guard do exactly that. Havard Wren stood the harbor watch 11 more years after that storm, and never spoke of it that I heard, except once. A young guardsman fresh to the wall asked him outright how he had found the nerve to refuse the ministry with his whole career on the table, and a ship full of strangers the only thing on the other side of the scale. And Wren looked at him for a while, the way he looked at the side of the official's face that night, and then he said the truest thing I ever heard him say, and it is where I will leave this, because there is nothing to put after it. It wasn't nerve, Wren said. There was nothing to be brave about. A man in distress on the water has a right to aid, and that right is older and bigger than any order any office can give, and standing in front of it to put it out was the one thing my post was never going to let me do. The deputy warden thought he was ordering me to refuse a ship. He was ordering me to stop being the thing I was set on that wall to be. No paper in the world can make a guard do that. He turned back to the gray water. You don't hold the wall for the ministry, lad. You hold it for the men in the sea who can't see the wall yet and are praying there's someone on it. That's the whole of the watch. The day you forget which one you're for, hand back the rifle. He never moved off his post that night until he was relieved at the proper hour. He never struck a blow, and he never raised his voice above the wind, and he answered an order to let 38 men drown with 3 plain words and 1 gloved hand flat on the brass. That is all he did. And the light stayed up, and the boom stayed open, and the harbor put to sea, and 38 men walked home on dry stone in the worst storm of the autumn. That is all he did, and after everything I have come to understand that it is also everything.